Chapter 1. The House by the Creek. The summer evening in Roanoke, Virginia, in 2013, carried a gentle warmth, the kind that lingered in the air as the sun dipped below the Blue Ridge Mountains. Emma Miller, 21 years old, stepped off the bus that had brought her back from college for the summer break. Her suitcase bumped along the cracked pavement as she walked the familiar path to her family's home on the outskirts of the city. She was a student of criminal psychology, her mind sharp with theories and case studies, her ambitions set on graduate school. The weight of her textbooks in her bag felt like a promise of a future she could already see. Her twin sister, Haley, had chosen a different path, staying in Roanoke to work at a local beauty salon, living with their parents in the house where the sisters had grown up. The Miller house stood at the end of a quiet street, its white clapboard exterior glowing faintly in the twilight. A modest garden, bursting with marigolds and roses, framed the front yard, while a narrow creek ran behind the property, its soft babbling a constant companion to the family's evenings. Emma had always found comfort in the house's predictable rhythms, the creak of the porch swing, the scent of her mother's lavender soap, the way the light filtered through the kitchen's lace curtains. It was a place where she could exhale, where the world felt safe and ordered. As she pushed open the front door, the familiar smell of polished wood and fresh laundry greeted her. She dropped her suitcase in the foyer and kicked off her sneakers, her shoulders relaxing at the thought of a summer free from deadlines. But as she moved through the house, something felt off, like a note played slightly out of tune. She paused in the hallway, her eyes catching on a coat hanging on the rack. It was a navy wool peacoat, identical to the one she had bought last winter during a rare splurge at a vintage shop near campus. She reached out, running her fingers over the fabric. It was hers, or it should have been. Yet the tag inside bore a different size, one that matched Haley's slightly slimmer frame. Shaking her head, Emma dismissed the thought. Sisters shared things. It wasn't unusual. She climbed the stairs to her old bedroom, passing Haley's door, which was slightly ajar. A glance inside revealed a bookshelf neatly lined with books and trinkets. Among them were Emma's old college notebooks, their covers worn from late-night study sessions. She frowned, her steps slowing. She hadn't brought those notebooks home. She had left them in her dorm, certain they were tucked away in a box under her bed. Yet there they were, arranged with care on Haley's shelf, their spines aligned as if they belonged there. In the bathroom, Emma reached for her favorite moisturizer, a lavender-scented cream she had used since high school. She found it on the counter, but the jar was new, unopened, its foil seal intact. Her own jar, half-used, was still in her dorm. She stared at the cream, her reflection in the mirror catching her eye. The face looking back was tired from the bus ride, her brown hair slightly mussed, her hazel eyes searching for an explanation. She told herself it was nothing. Haley must have liked the scent, bought her own. Sisters did that. They borrowed, they mimicked, they shared. But as she turned off the bathroom light and headed to her room, a faint unease settled in her chest, like a shadow cast by something she couldn't yet name. For now, she pushed it aside, convincing herself it was just the fatigue of travel. The house by the creek was still her sanctuary. At least, it always had been. Chapter 2. The Copy. As the summer days unfolded in Roanoke, Virginia, in 2013, Emma Miller began to notice an unsettling pattern weaving itself into her life. The initial discomfort she felt upon arriving home had not dissipated. Instead, it grew, fed by small, peculiar details that accumulated like dust in a neglected corner. She tried to focus on the lazy rhythm of her summer break, catching up with old friends and savoring the quiet of her hometown, but the sense of something being slightly askew clung to her. One humid evening, Emma attended a casual dinner at the home of a high school friend, a cozy gathering of familiar faces from her past. The table was set with mismatched plates, and the air buzzed with laughter and nostalgic stories. Emma wore a sundress she had picked out during her first year of college, a soft blue cotton piece with delicate embroidery along the hem. She felt at ease, her guard lowered by the warmth of the occasion. Then, halfway through the meal, the front door opened and Haley stepped into the room. Emma's breath caught as she saw her twin sister wearing an identical blue sundress, the same embroidery catching the light. Haley's hair was styled in the loose waves Emma favored, and her smile mirrored the one Emma had practiced in the mirror before leaving the house. Haley moved through the room with a confidence that felt foreign yet familiar. She joined the conversation effortlessly, recounting a story Emma had shared with her in private, a detailed anecdote about a nerve-wracking interview with her college admissions board. Haley's voice carried the same cadence Emma used when she told the story, her gestures mimicking the way Emma tilted her head when emphasizing a point. The friends around the table chuckled, assuming it was a playful twin prank, a performance for their amusement. But Emma's stomach tightened. She watched her sister, searching for a crack in the facade, a hint that this was indeed a game. She found none. Haley's eyes sparkled with a conviction that made Emma's skin prickle. In the days that followed, the similarities grew harder to ignore. Emma noticed Haley using phrases she had coined during late-night study sessions, casual expressions like chasing shadows, to describe overthinking or knot in the thread for a sudden problem. These were Emma's words, born from her own mind, yet they slipped from Haley's lips as if they belonged to her. At the family home, Emma spotted a stack of books on Haley's nightstand, titles on criminal psychology and behavioral analysis that Emma had been reading for her courses. She hadn't brought those books home. They were duplicates, their pages crisp and uncreased, as if purchased solely to mirror her own collection. One afternoon, while tidying her room, Emma found a leather-bound notebook tucked under a pile of clothes in the laundry basket. It was the same brand and style she had used for years to jot down her thoughts, but this one wasn't hers. The pages were filled with Haley's neat handwriting, detailing daily routines, observations, and even sketches of outfits Emma had worn. The notebook felt like a theft, an intrusion into the private corners of her life. Emma's unease deepened when she returned to her college campus in late August to prepare for the new semester. A close friend from her dorm, puzzled, mentioned receiving an email supposedly from Emma. The message was warm but oddly formal, filled with phrases Emma would never use, like ever so grateful and in due course. The email's tone felt like a stranger's, yet it bore her name. Sitting alone in her dorm room, Emma stared at her laptop screen, the email open before her. Her pulse quickened as the pieces began to align. The dress, the stories, the notebook, the email. They were not coincidences. Someone was stepping into her life, wearing her identity like a borrowed skin. And that someone was her twin, her mirror image, reflecting her in ways that felt less like sisterhood and more like a deliberate, unsettling imitation. Chapter 3. The Mirror Room. A month after the unsettling summer in Roanoke, Virginia, in 2013, Emma Miller decided to return home unannounced. The decision came abruptly, spurred by a restless night in her dorm, where the echoes of her sister's mimicry haunted her thoughts. She boarded a late bus on a Friday evening, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her mind racing with questions she couldn't yet articulate. Her parents had mentioned a weekend getaway to visit relatives, leaving the family home empty. As the bus wound through the familiar roads of her hometown, the Blue Ridge Mountains looming in the distance, Emma felt a knot of apprehension tighten in her chest. The house by the creek, once her sanctuary, now seemed to hold secrets she wasn't sure she wanted to uncover. When she arrived, the house was shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of a street lamp filtering through the trees. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and the nearby creek. Emma unlocked the front door, the creak of the hinges echoing in the silent foyer. She didn't bother turning on the lights, her footsteps soft on the hardwood floor as she moved through the familiar layout. Her heart thudded as she climbed the stairs, drawn inexplicably toward Haley's room. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of moonlight spilling through the gap. She pushed it open, her breath catching as she stepped inside. The room felt different, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. The walls, once adorned with posters of pop stars and abstract art, were now a gallery of photographs, dozens of them, pinned meticulously in neat rows. Each image captured Emma, jogging along the campus trail, her ponytail swinging, sitting on a bench in the quad, engrossed in a book, standing by her car in the college parking lot, unaware of the lens trained on her. The photos were candid, taken from a distance, their edges crisp and unblemished. Emma's skin prickled as she realized these were not snapshots from a shared family album. Someone had followed her, watched her, documented her life without her knowledge. Her eyes drifted to the desk, where a single lamp cast a dim glow over a clutter of papers and objects. At the center was a black notebook, its cover embossed with the words, "The Path to Convergence," in sharp, deliberate handwriting. Emma's hands trembled as she opened it. The pages were filled with meticulous notes, written in Haley's precise script. There were descriptions of Emma's mannerisms, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when nervous, the slight lilt in her voice when she laughed, the exact order of her morning routine. Entire paragraphs detailed her class schedule, her favorite coffee shop, even the way she held her pen during lectures. One page, marked with a red pen, stood out. In bold letters, it read, "She doesn't see how I've already become her." The words sent a chill down Emma's spine, their certainty more terrifying than any ambiguity. On a shelf above the desk, among a collection of trinkets and books, Emma spotted something that made her heart lurch. It was a student ID card, its plastic surface glinting under the lamp. The card bore her name, Emma Miller, and her university's logo, but the photo was unmistakably Haley's. The smile, the tilt of the head, even the lighting mimicked Emma's own ID photo, but the eyes staring back were her sister's. Emma stumbled backward, her shoulder brushing against the wall of photographs. Her breath came in shallow gasps as the room seemed to close in around her. This was no longer a game of sisterly imitation or harmless envy. The notebook, the photos, the forged ID, they formed a blueprint, a calculated plan that was nearly complete. Panic surged through her as she realized the depth of Haley's obsession, a mirror reflecting not just her face, but her entire existence. Chapter 4. The Diagnosis. In the days following her discovery in Haley's room, Emma Miller became consumed with piecing together the evidence of her sister's unsettling behavior. The photographs, the notebook, and the forged student ID weighed heavily on her mind, each item a fragment of a puzzle she was desperate to understand. She moved methodically, driven by the analytical instincts honed in her criminal psychology studies. Using her phone, she documented everything: the walls plastered with candid images of her daily life, the pages of Haley's notebook detailing her every habit, and the chilling red-inked declaration of becoming her. Each photo she took felt like a shield, a way to anchor the surreal truth in something tangible. She stored the images in a locked folder on her laptop, her hands steady, but her heart racing with the gravity of what she had uncovered. Back at her university campus in the fall of 2013, Emma sought answers beyond her own reasoning. She first visited the university's counseling center, slipping into the office between classes. The counselor, a kind-faced woman with a cluttered desk, listened as Emma described the photographs and the notebook without revealing their full extent. The counselor suggested sibling rivalry or perhaps an identity crisis, common among twins, but the explanation felt too tame for the calculated precision Emma had witnessed. Unsatisfied, Emma sought out a private psychologist in Roanoke, a specialist in personality disorders recommended by one of her professors. She drove back to her hometown one overcast afternoon, the folder of photos and her own notes tucked securely in her bag. The psychologist's office was small, lined with bookshelves and a single window overlooking a quiet street. Emma laid out her evidence on the desk, printed copies of the photos, screenshots of the notebook's pages, and the image of the forged ID. The specialist, a middle-aged man with wire-rimmed glasses, studied the materials in silence, his expression growing more serious with each passing minute. After a long pause, he offered a hypothesis. He suggested that Haley might be exhibiting signs of a rare condition known as pathological personality mimicry, a disorder rooted in deep emotional trauma, where an individual compulsively adopts another's identity. He theorized that a significant event in Haley's past could have triggered this behavior, causing her to fixate on Emma as a means of filling a perceived void in her own sense of self. The diagnosis was tentative, as he had not met Haley, but the meticulous nature of her actions pointed to something far beyond simple envy. Emma returned home to confront her parents, who had just come back from their weekend trip. The family gathered in the living room of the house by the creek, the familiar hum of the refrigerator in the background doing little to ease the tension. Emma spread the printed photos and copies of the notebook's pages across the coffee table, her hands steady as she watched her parents' reactions. Her mother's face paled as she scanned the images, her fingers hovering over a picture of Emma jogging, unaware of the camera. Her father sat rigidly, his eyes fixed on the notebook's red-inked words. At first, they resisted the implications, suggesting it was just Haley being overly attached, a phase born of sisterly competition. But as Emma pointed out the forged ID and the detailed logs of her life, their defenses crumbled. Her mother's hands trembled as she set down a photo, her mind drifting to a memory from years ago. When the twins were 7, Haley had wandered off at a crowded county fair, lost in the chaos of bright lights and noisy rides. For hours, she was missing, and when they finally found her, curled up behind a vendor's stall, she couldn't speak, only whispering Emma's name repeatedly, as if it were an anchor. Her parents had dismissed it as childish fear, but now, seeing the evidence before them, they recalled how Haley had clung to Emma in the weeks that followed, shadowing her every move. The realization settled over them like a heavy fog. Haley's fixation had been there all along, deeper and more complex than they had ever allowed themselves to acknowledge. Emma sat across from them, her evidence laid bare, feeling both validated and hollow, knowing that the truth about her sister was only the beginning of a much larger reckoning. Chapter 5. The Rift. In the autumn of 2013, Emma Miller resolved to confront her twin sister, Haley, alone. The weight of the evidence she had gathered, the photographs, the notebook, the forged ID, pressed heavily on her, urging her to seek answers directly from the source of her unease. She chose a place steeped in their shared history, a small pond on the edge of their family's property in Roanoke, Virginia, where the sisters had spent countless childhood afternoons catching frogs and skipping stones. The pond, surrounded by tall grasses and shaded by a lone willow tree, held memories of simpler times, and Emma hoped its familiarity might ground the conversation she dreaded. She sent Haley a brief text, asking to meet there at dusk, her fingers hesitating over the screen before pressing send. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the still water, Emma arrived at the pond. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, her hands tucked into her pockets to steady their trembling. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of moss and earth. Haley appeared moments later, her silhouette emerging from the path leading from the house. She moved with a quiet grace, her face partially obscured by the fading light, but Emma could see the familiar curve of her twin's jaw, so like her own, yet now unsettlingly foreign. They stood a few feet apart, the pond reflecting the last traces of daylight between them. Emma's heart pounded as she prepared to speak, her mind racing with the questions that had haunted her since discovering Haley's room. She wanted to know why her sister had meticulously cataloged her life, why she had worn her clothes, stolen her words, and crafted a false identity in her name. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but laced with an undercurrent of pain. Haley listened, her expression unreadable at first, then softening into a faint smile that sent a chill through Emma. There were no tears, no outbursts, only that smile, calm and deliberate, as if Haley had anticipated this moment. She responded with words that struck Emma like a physical blow. She described herself as an empty shell, a hollow vessel compared to Emma, whom she saw as whole, vibrant, real. Haley admitted to wanting to try on that wholeness, to feel what it was like to be someone complete, even if only for a moment. The confession left Emma reeling, her mind struggling to process the depth of her sister's longing. She stood frozen, the pond's gentle ripples the only sound breaking the silence. Drawing on her resolve, Emma issued an ultimatum, her voice firm despite the turmoil within. She told Haley she had two choices: seek professional help voluntarily or face the consequences of Emma reporting her actions to the authorities. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Haley's smile faded, her eyes searching Emma's face for a moment, before she turned and walked back toward the house, her figure dissolving into the twilight without a backward glance. The next morning, Emma woke to a quiet house. She found her parents in the kitchen, their faces drawn with worry. Haley's room was empty, her closet stripped of clothes, her suitcase gone. On her desk, the black notebook lay open to a new page, its final entry written in Haley's precise handwriting. "Too soon, I'm not ready to let her go." The words were a quiet confession, a glimpse into the unresolved fixation that had driven Haley away. Emma stood in the doorway of the empty room, her parents' hushed voices fading into the background. The pond outside shimmered under the morning sun, its surface unbroken, as if the confrontation had never happened. But for Emma, the rift between her and her twin felt like a wound that would not easily heal. Chapter 6. Without Reflection. A year passed since the confrontation at the pond in Roanoke, Virginia, and by the summer of 2014, Emma Miller had carved out a new chapter of her life. She had graduated from her university, her degree in criminal psychology secured with honors, a testament to her determination, despite the shadow of her twin sister's actions. Her academic success opened the door to a coveted opportunity, an internship with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit in Washington, D.C. She packed her belongings, leaving behind the house by the creek and its memories, and moved to a small apartment in the bustling capital. The city's energy, its crowded streets, the hum of government buildings, the constant pulse of ambition, felt like a fresh start, a place where she could redefine herself on her own terms. Her apartment was modest, a one-bedroom unit with bare walls and a view of a narrow alley. She furnished it sparsely, prioritizing function over sentiment. Yet one item held a permanent place on her kitchen table: a framed copy of an old photograph from her childhood. In it, she and Haley, no more than 6 years old, stood hand in hand by the creek behind their family home, their identical faces beaming under the summer sun. The photo was a quiet reminder of a time before the rift, but also a talisman, a way to anchor herself in her own identity. Each morning, before leaving for the FBI field office, Emma paused to look at the image, her fingers brushing the frame as if to reassure herself of who she was. No letters or messages from Haley had arrived in the year since her disappearance. The silence was both a relief and a lingering unease, like a storm that had passed, but left the air charged. Emma threw herself into her work, analyzing case files and studying behavioral patterns, her mind sharpened by the discipline of her new role. Yet, traces of the past crept into her routine. On certain mornings, as she stepped out of her apartment, she found a small bouquet of roses left on her doorstep. The flowers were always fresh, their petals vibrant red, but they came without a note or signature. She never saw who placed them there, and the building's security cameras revealed nothing. At first, she threw the roses away, their presence stirring a flicker of fear. Over time, she began to keep them, arranging them in a simple vase, though she never fully shook the sense that they were a message she couldn't decipher. Emma's life in Washington moved forward, but she carried a quiet vigilance. Every mirror in her apartment was draped with a scarf or cloth, their reflective surfaces obscured. She avoided them instinctively, unwilling to confront the possibility of seeing a face that might remind her of Haley's imitation. The act of covering the mirrors became a ritual, a way to protect the boundaries of her identity. Her days were filled with the demands of her internship, long hours, complex cases, and the pressure to prove herself. But the photograph on her table and the covered mirrors were constants, grounding her in a reality she had fought to reclaim. Each glance at the childhood photo by the creek was a silent vow to remember who she was and to ensure no one could ever take that from her again.